10 मई को पाकिस्तान की जानिब से भारत को मुसलसल दूसरी बार एक भरपूर जवाब दिए जाने और अमेरिका की सालसी में होने वाली जंगबंदी के बाद अब जनूबी एशिया में ताकत के तवाज़ुन में तब्दीली पर बहुत बात हो रही है और पाकिस्तान की जानिब से अस्करी महाज पर चीनी टेक्नोलॉजी के भरपूर इस्तेमाल के तनाजुर में अब खित्ते में चीन का स्ट्रेटेजिक किरदार भी इस वक्त ज़ेर बहस बना हुआ है। इसके साथ साथ अब ये सवाल भी उठ रहा है कि अमरीकी मुदाखलत के बाद पाकिस्तान के साथ कश्मीर, दहशतगर्दी और पानी के इशूज़ पर भारत कैसे एंगेज करेगा, जबकि आज ही वज़ीर आज़म शहबाज शरीफ की तरफ से ये तजवीज़ भी सामने आई है कि पाक भारत वज़राए ख़ारजा की सतह पर बातचीत के लिए एक मुश्तरका कमेटी तश्कील दी जानी चाहिए। आखिर 10 मई को पाक भारत कशीदगी में अमरीका की एंट्री कैसे हुई और अब जनूबी एशिया में सूरत हाल क्या रुख इख्तियार करने जा रही है, इस हवाले से गुफ्तगू करने के लिए हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं मारूफ अमरीकी सहाफ़ी और साउथ एशियन उमूर के माहिर माइकल कुगलमैन। Assalamu alaikum, Michael. Good morning to you.
Thank you. Good to be here with you.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, how do you look at this Pak-India recent tensions, and if you compare it to the tensions in the past, how do you think these were the most intense, and what is your assessment? Which side appeared weaker, and in what sense, and which side had the edge over the other, in what sense?
Well, this was just a very different type of crisis than we've seen recently in terms of the recent past crises, mainly because there was, the level of force used was just much more. The scale was higher, the intensity was higher, and you just had more cases of hostilities. I think what we've been used to looking at 2019, looking at 2016, is India doing something and then Pakistan either not responding or responding once, and then things essentially wrap up. But what made this crisis so different, and in my view so much more dangerous, is that this was not just a case of a strike, a counter-strike, and a call for de-escalation, but you actually had several different tit-for-tat cycles, and right before the talks started leading to the ceasefire, you had both countries sending drones and missiles into each other's territory and hitting military sites, some of them quite sensitive. This is quite significant, and what I've been saying, and I speak as an outside observer of the crisis and of India-Pakistan relations. This was the closest that India and Pakistan have been to going to war since the Kargil conflict in 1999. I would actually argue that the nuclear deterrent was tested more than it has ever been, at least since 1999, but even on the whole, since Pakistan and India became formal nuclear states in 1998. Just because of the fact that you had military force being used in different parts of each country, the level of intensity was very high, and so many sensitive sites being hit.
So you're basically confirming that the nuclear deterrence has also been tested this time after 1995.
Yeah, well, of course, nuclear deterrence is always going to be tested whenever there's any type of hostilities, because both countries have nuclear weapons. But I would argue that in this particular case, it was put to the test, especially markedly, just because we were seeing high levels of escalation in terms of conventional force being used. Again, we have not seen cases of each country firing missiles and drones into the other country, deep into the other country, and targeting pretty sensitive sites. I think at the end of the day, each country respects the nuclear deterrence.
And Michael, was this the reason that US had to jump into this conflict, and they had to, like Vice President Vance went to speak to Modi and directly, and on May 10th, just hours after Vance had declared that it is not US's business to intervene in this conflict?
I think all along, despite the messaging from the U.S. of not wanting to get involved, I think all along there was a desire on the part of the U.S. to keep a focus on what was happening. There were consistent calls for de-escalation. And in fact, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he was in contact with his counterparts in India and Pakistan several times in the days leading up to the ceasefire. But to your question, I think that why the U.S. decided to get involved to help broker the ceasefire. Two reasons. The first one is just escalation dynamics. The fact that, as we've been discussing, you had these repeated tit-for-tat cycles of hits on both sides, and I think that was really the U.S. quite concerned. And two, the other reason, and I think this is the core reason, is indeed concerns about nuclear escalation risks. And there's already been a fair amount of reportage on this in the U.S., that when you started having several particular sites that were targeted,
Right.
particularly the Khan base in Rawalpindi, and then also the public announcement by Islamabad that it was going to convene its National Command Authority. I think this is when the U.S. really started to get concerned and started to really worry about nuclear escalation risks. And indeed, that's
Right.
what
And
prompted.
was India desperate for a ceasefire, in your opinion?
I mean, I'm not sure.
Okay.
It seemed to me that based on the messaging coming from each capital, that both capitals would have been perfectly comfortable to continue going for a few more rounds. But I would also argue, I mean, several things. One, neither country wanted a war. Neither country wanted an all-out war. Neither country could afford an all-out war. And I think that you could argue that at that point, right when the talks for the ceasefire started to begin, each side could have claimed victory. They had each dealt damage to the other's military. So, I think that they were perhaps ready for the idea of a ceasefire, even though it appeared that they would have been happy to continue going for another round or two. But the fact that the ceasefire was successful, the fact that the U.S. pitch for the ceasefire actually worked, that suggested there was receptivity from the Indian side and also from the Pakistani side.
Right. And does Pakistan now hold a deterrence advantage over India, especially after the way Pakistan had responded and retaliated?
Well, I mean, Pakistan responded to each of the Indian strikes quite with a lot of muscle and very quickly as well. And I do think that there may be some in India that don't think Pakistan has the capacity to respond to these Indian strikes. So absolutely, and indeed, I mean,
So Pakistan surprised India and a lot of other people in the world as well.
I think, yeah, well, I mean, not in terms of observers and analysts that follow these dynamics, but I
Right.
think that particularly among the public in India didn't think that Pakistan would have the capacity to respond. And let's be very clear, India has never denied that several of its jets were shot down by Pakistan. So, I think it's true that Pakistan did shoot down several Indian jets. That is a major development, I think. It's really a milestone development in India-Pakistan relations, and I think it says a lot. I mean, it is an embarrassment for the Indian military to have several of its fighter jets shot down by Pakistan, but I think that also will psychologically have an impact and make very clear that, Pakistan does have the damage to hit back hard against India's military in ways that can be very impactful.
Right. And was the Chinese factor a surprise? The way J-10Cs were used to counter French Rafales, or the Chinese technology was used to launch cyber attacks in India?
No, I don't think this was surprising. I mean, it's well known that China has this very deep alliance with Pakistan, and that China is a key supplier of weaponry to Pakistan. And I think that, I know that the U.S. imposes significant limits on how Pakistan can use U.S.-made F-16. So it's only natural Pakistan would want to use those that, it's authorized to use Chinese-made F-16s for contingencies such as the ones that played out in this crisis with India.
Right. And how would Modi now react? Like, will Modi crumble under the fallout of the military damage Pakistan has inflicted upon India, or will he again hit back once he recovers from this setback? How do you look at this post-ceasefire scenario between the two countries?
Well, I mean, it's a fragile ceasefire. I mean, of course, there were several reported violations soon after it was put in place. There were no violations over the last day or so, which is important. But it's the bottom line. I mean, the tensions, or should I say, the root drivers of the tensions in this relationship have not gone away, quite frankly. And the fact that you had such significant levels of force being used against the other, that suggests each country is perfectly comfortable using force, limited force, but still significant levels of force under the nuclear umbrella. And so I think it's just a matter of time before you have the next trigger event that could precipitate another crisis, much like the one that played out over the last week.